Okay, hello everyone again. We hope all of you are well, and we thank you for joining this session and taking your time off. I know we are all at different time zones. The current situation with regard to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to look at alternative ways in order to run programs and activities for our member countries. And we are pleased to have technology to assist us in this way, which is allowing us to have many of our activities, although it's not like the real thing. However, this allows us to interact with each other and gives them an opportunity to also get updated with the information that is required. Another important point by having this training or sessions online is it gives us the opportunity for member countries to interact with each other. We are all in one place together, and we can share experiences in our own countries here as well. So that's really a plus point. So moving on to the purpose of this awareness session. We see that the rapid expansion of intensive production system is seeing also increasing trend in global fish trade. And this intensification sometimes acts as a platform for transboundary pathogens. And farmers need to manage this aquatic animal health, deliberating human health, environment, and international trade to ensure that the sector is resilient and most importantly sustainable. So this session should get precedence, or rather aquatic animal health management itself should take the helm to get precedence to all the stakeholders, beneficiaries from regional, national and international level. So this session is especially designed and organized for InfoFish member countries to be updated on this aquatic animal health management, as well as compliance to international trade. So we welcome you to hear this session out and share your opinion as well as if you have any clarification.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Karun, welcome.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we have just started.
The problem of Safari, because then I closed everything and started with Google Chrome. So then
okay, awesome, great. So we've just started introducing the session, Dr. Karun.
Okay.
So I will just continue and then we'll go on from there.
Okay.
So as I was explaining, the session is specially designed for member countries to be updated on aquatic animal health management, as well as complying to international trade. So it will be very interesting to hear also the feedback from member countries on the experience on their side, as well as a very good platform to exchange experiences. So we have with us three experts today. First of all, Dr. Rohana. Dr. Rama Subasinghe is a specialist in aquaculture development. He was with FAO for a very long time and retired in 2015 October while serving as the chief of the aquaculture branch in FAO. So, and then we have Dr. Idya Karunasagar, who is part of the FAO WHO microbiological risk
The line is pretty poor.
Sorry, Shelin. Your line is breaking. Can you introduce again?
Should I switch my video off?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And then can you start again with the Dr. Idea?
Oh, okay. Right. Yes, so we have Dr. Idya Karnasagar, who is based in India, and he's from in the Fisheries Science University, as well as National Professionalship of the Indian Council of Agricultural Research. Dr. Karun was part of FAO WHO microbiological risk assessment in the late 90s and served as a drafting member of Vibrio risk assessment from 2000 to 2005. He also was with FAO as a senior fisheries industry officer and led a team on fish quality and safety. Dr. Idya played a key role in some of FAO's food safety risk assessments. We also have with us from Infofish, Mr. Sujit Das, who is a technical officer and who joined Infofish in 2019. And Sujit has more than 15 years of experience in fisheries and aquaculture sector in the South and Southeast Asian countries. So, so it was a very interesting lineup of experts we have, and very experienced team as well. And we are confident that we will be able to get exposed to the information required for this session. And just to welcome each and every one of you from our member countries, we have from welcome to Mr. Adam Manik from Maldives. We have Ms. Chandara Khan from, I think is from Cambodia. And Ms. Jerapon Jarana Sripasit from Thailand, Ms. Nabila Abdullah from Maldives, Mr. Natapol Ongmali from Thailand, Mr. Pancharas Gonchanawat from Thailand, and Mr. Somnip, I think he's from Thailand as well. So we still have a few more members who are coming in from Cambodia, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. So as they're coming in, we encourage you to please look out for opportunities to seek any clarifications at the end. We have a session, a Q&A session at the end of the whole webinar. And if you look at the bottom of your screen, you have a raise hand icon. So participants who would like to ask questions over the speaker, you may click on the raise hand tab, and we will switch on the microphone for you, and you'll be able to speak directly to the panelists. Alternatively, if you would like to just send in your questions, you could type in the questions on the Q&A tab, which you see at the bottom of your screen as well. So if should there be any other questions that you would like to check with the Secretariat, please feel free to just drop in a message on the chat box. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our first speaker, expert for today, Dr. Roana Subasinghe, who will be giving us the Aquatic Animal Health Management and Compliance to International Trade Obligations Global Overview. Dr. Roana, over to you.
Thank you, Charlene. Good afternoon to everyone. It's pretty good morning to myself. It's it's 8:30 or 9:30 here in the UK. How much time I have? 20 minutes?
30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay, good. Right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, it's clear.
Yes. Okay. Let me share my screen so that can you see the screen? Can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. The There's no sound from anyone, but probably everybody can hear, right? Okay. I won't be too long, but we're talking about trade in aquatic animal commodities or aquatic animals. And I think this is not a new subject for anyone, I guess, who has been working in aquaculture. And let me see how we can move. Right. Okay. Aquatic animals and their products, we call them as aquatic commodities. Over the past 50 years, the number of aquatic animals and commodities moved across the world has increased significantly. We believe it's almost, well, many fold increase over the past 50 years. And in parallel to the growth of aquaculture sector, because aquaculture sector also grew very fast over the past 4 decades, at some time even a rate of something like 10% or 11% a year. A little bit, but still we are producing nearly 53% of the fish that we eat come from aquaculture. Because, can you hear me? Hello?
Dr. Rohana?
Yes?
Yeah, maybe could you go in a little bit closer to the mic? It's
Yes.
clear. It's clear, and
Okay.
we have muted everybody.
Let me take. Yes. Let me take my it's a bit complicated. Okay, let me see. How can I take my okay. Tell me if you don't hear me, right?
Yeah, it's clear now. It's clear, yeah.
Okay. So the international trade, the trade liberalization, because after the WTO agreements, and sort of there's a lot of movement of commodities, including food. So some years back, and there are many other international agencies like Asia Pacific Commission, the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. Then you have also Eastern Asian groups working together, ASEAN, all sorts of agreements and trade agreements and political agreements. And then also the fish has become an extremely important food commodity over the past 2-3 decades. The demand has gone up, and the demand is continuously going up. And so there's also, consumers are not just eating fish as we used to do 20 years ago. So we are now looking at all kind of different value-added products, and we are also looking at various processed products. And so aquaculture sector growth, and also for looking for new species. 20 years ago, we probably had only about 100 species of fish growing. Today, we have more than 250 species of fish cultured in the world. So people are very exploratory, trying to do new things. So therefore, they are moving, and products are moved from place to place. As you know, fisheries trade is probably the biggest trade in the world, much more than any other food commodity. The aquaculture, as we know, the species, we have fish, crustaceans, mollusks, all kind of other invertebrates, aquatic plants, and sometimes amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, all that. But in aquaculture, we are basically talking about fish, crustaceans, mollusks, and aquatic plants. And also there is a very important component is ornamental fish trade. If you're talking about moving live aquatic animals, we move more ornamental fish than food fish. So the ornamental fish range is extremely big. It's a big aquarium trade, aquaculture development, and also maintenance. We use fish, we use food, and also there is a sports sector, angling, and also there is a captive fisheries development and enhancement. We are putting fish in the ocean, and for enhancement, we also move animals for research. We also move animals for other feeds and medicine health products. So moving aquatic animals, live aquatic animals, is not only for aquaculture. Ornamental fish is big, aquaculture is also big, but there are other various reasons for moving animals. And so the commodities traded are very, very diverse. You go to the supermarket, you will find frozen fish. You find all kind of different way of processed fish, value-added fish. And some of them are basically fresh frozen. Some of them are cooked, pickled, whatever it is. And also, we also move what we call genetic material, gametes, DNAs and various things. We also have other things that we move, vaccines, sera, scientific specimens, all kind of things. So the whole idea of moving products, we move live animals, we move processed animals, we move various other live and other products which are not for food, or it could also be for other purposes. In aquaculture, all kind of life stages are moved. We move broodstock, we move juveniles, fries, post-larvae, nuclei. So all what I'm trying to tell you is that moving live aquatic animals and their products is a very big business in the world. Volume traded is enormous. We don't really have a good grasp of in terms of numbers. Over 1 billion ornamental fish traded each year, and 4,000 freshwater, 4,000 freshwater and 1,400 marine ornamental species are traded. Not these are numbers, the number of species. So ornamentals originate from many countries, and people who are in Asia, you know, like Singapore, there's basically a hub for moving live aquatic animals that is particularly on the ornamental fish trade. A trade in live aquatic animals for food production in aquaculture is also not very well documented, but we believe more than 250 species of aquatic animals and plants are moved globally. And numbers are very high, it could even be more, but there is no good record of how many. But there are many being moved. Can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Anna, clear.
Okay, good, right. So all movements of live aquatic animals involve an element of pathogens, genetics, and ecological risk. This is something that we would talk for the next 10 minutes. Anything that you move from one place to the other, the movements it could be an introduction, means something that was not in a place, so you are bringing a new, that's called a new introduction. It could be a translocation from place to a place, but it was probably before. It could be a reintroduction, all kind of different movements. Whatever you move, either a live animal or a product, if the possibility of a pathogen moving along with that is always a risk. So that's what we call pathogen risk. If you're talking about moving an animal live and putting it into a wild environment, and if that animal continues to breed and create a population, there's a genetic or ecological risk for that environment. So any movement of a live animal has either a pathogen risk, a genetic risk, or an ecological risk. There are examples in many places which we have seen, particularly for pathogens. We have seen many shrimp diseases. We have seen some other fish diseases where the pathogens have moved with the animals and establishing pathogens and creating epidemics in countries. And then, of course, you have genetics risks that we have seen in many places. Even an example is some of the movements of tilapias in some countries and also some of the movements of some other species. And so aquaculture is a expanding exercise, expanding business, expanding industry, and we need to prepare more fish. We need to produce more fish for the growing population. So billions of aquatic animals are moved annually because of either due to the ornamental fish trade or if not for the aquaculture trade. And almost all movements of aquatic animal commodities involve an element of risk, either ecological, pathogen, or genetics. The nature of the world trade on aquatic animals is such that it is impossible for most countries to conduct a detailed health inspections or quarantine all animals being imported. In fact, we believe we can say that every animal that moves to a country or a new place should be quarantined. It's very easy to say that, but doing it is going to be very difficult. And in view of the current world trade situation, a national policy of zero risk is absolutely not realistic. It's going to be extremely difficult to say that there is no risk of moving a particular animal, because we cannot guarantee a zero risk. There is always a risk. So risk analysis, therefore, is very important before you move an animal, before you introduce an animal, and it is often possible to reduce risks to an acceptable level, what we call an acceptable risk. So every movement, if it is an introduction, we look at risks, we analyze risks, and then we come up with what we call an acceptable level of risk. And that acceptable level of risk, we develop mitigatory measures to reduce that risk, what is acceptable. That's why we call it acceptable level of risk. There's always some risk. There are treaties and agreements related to international trade. There are several. First one, of course, is the WTO agreement on application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. That's called SPS agreement. SPS agreement is all members of the WTO are obligatory to abide by the provisions given in the agreement for SPS. Then you have Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD of the UNEP, and all signatory countries are supposed to abide by the agreement. Then you have CITES, which is a convention on international trade in endangered species. The signatory countries are supposed to comply with that, and there are certain species are not supposed to be moved. They are called endangered species in CITES. European Union legislation and directives within the European Union countries and third-party countries where you require a certain compliance. And then, of course, you have in support World Organization for Animal Health, what we call Office Internationale des Epizooties, that's OIE, have Aquatic Animal Health Code and a manual which provides you all required international guidance for trade in aquatic animals and aquatic animal products. In the the main regulatory instruments, there are three main regulatory instruments within the WTO SPS agreement. WTO SPS agreement has a food safety component where Dr. Karun will explain to you more. Codex Alimentarius Commission, FAO, WHO, a secretariat. And then we have animal health, that's the World Organization for Animal Health, that's OIE. And then you have a plant life and plant health aspects are covered by the IPPC, International Plant Protection Convention hosted by FAO. So these are the three main regulatory instruments. If there is any dispute between two countries or two parties, all the technical assistance and technical support is provided by these agencies. WTO SPS agreement, which is the most important, is the animal health. The OIE or form is the dispute resolution agency. So it gives you several documentation and instruments: OIE Aquatic Animal Health Code, OIE Diagnostic Tests for Aquatic Animal Diseases, and OIE Aquatic Animal Commission, and OIE Reference Laboratories. I'm not going to go into the details of what OIE does. If you go to the website, you would be able to see how elaborate OIE is and what support is provided by OIE for guiding health during international transfers and international trade. The whole idea is to reduce possible risks of pathogen transfer, pathogen introduction, or what we call TAD, transboundary aquatic animal diseases, during a trade in aquatic animals, either live, mainly live aquatic animals, and also some products. There are several key treaties, as I explained to you. ICES Code of Practice on the introductions and transfers of marine organisms, which came out in 2005. That's called ICES 2005. That provides you international, is a trade agreement, and these are the guidance material that provides you. IFAC, Code and Practice and Procedures for Introductions and Transfers of Marine and Freshwater Organisms, that is Turner 1988. That's the European Inland Fisheries Advisory Committee, IFAC. And then you have Asia Regional Technical Guidelines on Health Management, that is FAO and NACA, which compiled in 2000, and that supports 21 participating countries, including, I think, all of you are listening, and also ASEAN member countries. Then you have Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, which is an FAO 195 countries agreement made in 1995, excuse me, for producing a certain amount of information and guidance on international transfers. But most relevant international transfers health guidelines come from Asia Regional Technical Guidelines. If you go to website, you can find it is, although it is nearly 20 years old, but it has a lot of good material for someone to read and understand. Some of these documents you probably have seen: Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, Code of Conduct for sort of guidelines on aquaculture development, and FAO NACA technical guidelines, and then there's diagnostic manual. All these are important for compliance to international trading obligations for aquatic animal health. There are guiding materials on pathogen risk analysis, particularly NACA and OIE together, along with the Department of Fisheries Thailand, provided 2 manuals some time back: Capacity and Awareness Building on Import Risk Analysis, Manual on Risk Analysis. There are new documents also available, but these are, some of them are old documents, but they are very, very resourceful for someone to understand. If you want to go into detail, if you want to go into a more elaborate risk assessment, then of course it's a big process, but it is good for you to read these things to understand. Pathogen risk analysis, there are other countries, SPC, South Pacific Commission, and countries like Australia, New Zealand, and have very relevant documentation and supporting documents for ASEAN countries already published. Seafood safety and quality, I'm not going to touch, but I think this document, Dr. Karun probably will tell you how important these things are and how much work FAO and WHO has been done and providing guidance for compliance. We have ISIS, a code, which is a very good guiding document for transfers. For an example, if I tell you, if you are moving a new species to a new place, let's say we are moving species X to a new country or new place internationally, you cannot immediately put that animal into the wild. You have to quarantine that animal. You have to breed that animal. You get the F1 progeny, then you grow the F1 progeny, you breed that F1 progeny again, you get a F2 progeny, and then you grow and breed F2 progeny, and you only use the F3 progeny for anything that you want to do with that animal. In fact, you're supposed to keep 2 generations of that animal in quarantine in a country if it is a new species to a country. So if it is a relocation or something, it is different. But if it's a new species, you really have to make sure that you wait for 2 generations to ensure that there are no pathogens, no diseases going into the wild. And there are also something what we call invasive alien species. This is a CBD definition of certain species which the countries or the people believe that it has a very negative ecological impact. Some are invasive species. In some countries are not necessarily invasive in another country, but there are a list of invasive species which a control is required. So there are also guidance material on that. There are global guidelines on better management practices, on-farm disease prevention, surveillance, compliance with national legislation, certification, aquaculture certification. Also, when you look at your various aquaculture certification schemes, there is a component on health. What need to be done to reduce the risks? Everything, every guidance is helping you to reduce the risk of disease occurrence in your farm, as well as to reduce the risk of TAD, what we call transboundary aquatic animal diseases in aquaculture. Yes, there are farmline health management guidelines, and also there's a lot of other farm education material available. Most of these things are available online. You can just Google and find. There are a million things available for you. There are these 3 main online resources from OIE, from NACA FAO quarterly aquatic animal disease reporting, and various things are also available. I think that's it for the moment. And the key points again, international treaties and agreements are extremely important. The countries, signatories has to abide by these provisions, and which is not easy, but the countries must improve their policies and institutional capacity to be able to comply to some of these conditions and some of these standards. And despite all that, of course, transboundary aquatic animal diseases continue to spread, and it is our responsibility to try and reduce this in aquaculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rohana, for that interesting overview on the health management and some of the main compliance regulations. So again, we will be having a session on questions and answers towards the end of this whole session. And you will be able to either submit your questions through the Q&A tab, which you see at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, you can actually already type them out on the Q&A session. Or if you prefer to ask the question live, we can do that at the end of this session. If you could use the raise hand tab that you see, if You click on that, we will activate your microphone and you will be able to ask the question live to the panelists. So we'll move on to the next on the agenda, which is the topic on HACCP in aquatic products, maintaining food safety, a global perspective. And it gives me great honor to introduce Dr. Idya Karunasagar to present this topic. Dr. Idya, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Dr. Karan, we can hear you.
Okay, okay.
We just like to, would you be able to share your screen?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. Right.
Is it coming?
Yeah, we can see your desktop.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it fine now?
Yes, and then full screen.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
Perfect.
so
Yeah.
what I'll be talking is about HACCP, which is Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point in maintaining food safety. And I think this is now coming at the right time. Just this Sunday, we had the World Food Safety Day. So June 7th is declared as the World Food Safety Day by the United Nations. So most countries would have celebrated this World Food Safety Day in different ways. So now let us see why HACCP is important. Now, before going to that, I'll tell a little bit about the fish processing. This is from the FAO Sofia, that is State of the World Fisheries and Aquaculture 2020 is now available. And you can see that about 70 million tons of fish are utilized in live, fresh or chilled form, and more than 50, maybe 55 million tons are used in the frozen form. And then you have prepared, preserved, and cured products. So fish is consumed in different ways. And as you can see here, you can see the relation between global fish production and fish export. So fish is one of the most traded commodities. And as you can see, over 60 million tons of fish, equivalent live weight, is exported internationally. So this is a commodity of great importance for international trade. And who are the major players? So here you can see the exports mainly come from China is the leading country. And then of course Norway being the exporter of salmon. And then you have Vietnam, Chile, then Thailand, India, United States, Canada. And then who are the importers? So the major importers are, of course, if you take a single country, it is United States, but if you take a group of countries, it will be the European Union. And now, as you can see, China emerging as an important importer also, accounting for about 9%. So as much of seafood imports as Japan in the case of China. And then what are the requirements for import and exports? I would like to talk about two major groups of requirements. Now, each country has what are called regulatory requirements. These are requirements laid down by the governments. So these operate through the official channels. So each country will have a competent authority. And the competent authority will have to ensure that these practices are followed throughout the chain, the farm, like from farm to table. So, or from the case of aquaculture, it will be from hatchery till it goes to the exporter or the consumer in the domestic market, if it is a domestic market. Now, in addition to these regulatory requirements, there are also non-regulatory requirements. So these are not requirements laid down by governments, but these are requirements laid down by business houses. As we know now, many of the big retailers are importing a lot of seafood, and they have their own requirements. Some examples of non-regulatory requirements are like certifications, like aquaculture certifications, at farm level, or there may be also seafood safety related certifications in processing level. You would have heard about SQF, BRC. So these are all requirements laid down by the importers. These are not government requirements, but the importing party requirements. So these are generally classified as non-regulatory requirements. So they operate from business to business. But again, though these are business to business, they are important for trade, and starting from farm, the operators may have to follow these practices. Now, EU being an important market, if you take an example of EU, the regulatory requirements are like EU hygiene package, and then HACCP is a important requirement for seafood safety, because HACCP is a preventive measure. And then you have various residue levels for veterinary drugs, contaminants, additive levels. So these all come under the regulatory requirements. And as you can see here, many of them are also in codex. So internationally, these are decided by codex, and most member countries accept codex standards because they are also party to the codex standards. So food safety and quality and trade practices are generally covered under these regulatory requirements, and operational aspects like good hygienic practices, traceability, HACCP labeling, then product standards, maximum limits for additives, MRLs for regulated veterinary drugs. So here you can see the relation between the basic requirement, what we call as prerequisite requirements, which consists of general food hygiene, which is based on the Codex General Principles of Food Hygiene, and program of good manufacturing practice, and HACCP. So you cannot think of implementing HACCP unless you have met with the prerequisite requirements. So the basic hygiene practices constitute the basic requirements, which are prerequisite. And in Codex, we have this hygiene across the commodities. So there is a horizontal code of practice, which is applicable for all commodities. Could be for fish, meat, or vegetables. So this Codex basic text on food hygiene talks about general principles of food hygiene, which should be followed by all commodities. But since fish has certain additional requirements, we have a separate code of practice for fish and fishery products. So this talks specifically about what, say, needs to be done by those who are catching fish on board the vessel, in a fish landing center, or in an aquaculture farm, and post-harvest handling. So all these aspects of basic hygiene related to fish and fishery products are in this code of practice for fish and fishery products. Now, in addition to these, of course, this code of practice also specifically talks about prerequisite requirements. Some examples are you need to have a proper building design, product flow, how the raw material arrives, where the product is processed, and how the final product goes out from the facility. Then cleaning and disinfection programs, then equipment calibrations, and how the management has to be committed for implementing the various control measures, supplier approval, product specifications, and so on. So there are a number of aspects which are considered prerequisite, which are laid down in this code of practice for fish and fishery products. So some example of this is also illustrated in the code. So how the factory layout should be, and how the temperature should be maintained. So all these aspects are covered in the code of hygienic practice for fish and fishery products. Because particular importance should be given to water and ice, because as soon as the fish is caught, it comes in contact with, of course, it is already in water. Then, of course, you may wash the fish. So what type of water is to be used for washing the fish? And fish, the temperature has to be maintained immediately after catch. So you need to use ice. So what should be the quality of ice? And as you may realize, sometimes we may say always for processing, you need to use clean water or potable water. So in a factory, probably one can have potable water, but what about on board a fishing vessel or in a landing center? So what should be the quality of water that is used? Now, the term clean water is used in Codex, but there is still discussion on what should be the parameter for this clean water, what we call as clean water. So there is a Codex electronic working group on working on this definition of water, which is used at, say, different stages of food processing. It may be in fisheries, or it may be even in a farm, horticulture farm, which is used for washing vegetables and so on. So water and ice need attention because most of the contamination comes through this water and ice. And then once these prerequisite requirements are met, then you can think of applying the HACCP, that is Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point. So this is a preventive approach because this actually started probably in the mid-90s, the implementation of this HACCP as a control measure. Before that, most of the control was by implementing a testing. So you test the product and say whether it's acceptable or not. But then you cannot test every can out of the millions of cans a factory produces, or similar examples can be given in the case of fillets and so on. So testing will look at only a very small proportion of the products that are produced, and failure may not be detected by testing. So that's why you need to adopt this preventive measure. So HACCP is such a preventive measure where you are trying to identify, evaluate, and control the food safety hazards. So this provides a framework to produce food safety and demonstrate that safety aspects have been fully considered in procuring raw material and in the processing steps. Focus on prevention and control of hazards and not on inspection and product testing. So emphasis on the use of science and technology for producing safe food. So when we talk about HACCP, so we are talking about hazards. So what do you mean by hazards? So this could be a biological, chemical, or physical agent or condition of food with a potential to cause adverse effect. And hazard analysis is the process of collecting, evaluating the information on hazards and conditions leading to their presence, and then decide what measures are to be taken to prevent their occurrence or make the risk acceptable. So the terms that are used are control. So this is used in a verb form or a noun form. So when it's used in a verb form, to take all necessary actions to ensure and maintain compliance with criteria established in the HACCP plan. And when it's a noun form, this is the state where correct procedures are being followed and criteria are being met. And then control measure refers to any action and activity that can be used to prevent or eliminate food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. And then critical control point is a step at which control can be applied and is essential to prevent or eliminate food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. So then you have to define what are the critical limits, which are criteria which separates acceptability from unacceptability. And it's not sufficient to lay down this criteria and implement them, but then you need to verify whether it's actually working. So verification involves application of methods, procedures, tests, and other evaluations, in addition to monitoring to determine the compliance with HACCP plan. So corrective action refers to any action to be taken when the result of monitoring at the critical control point indicate a loss of control. So there can be deviations, and this could be a failure to meet a critical limit, and what you need to do in case of deviation also needs to be considered in a HACCP plan. So you need a flow diagram, which is a systematic representation of the sequence of steps or operations used in the production or manufacture of a particular food item. So HACCP is defined in Codex Code of Fish and Fishery Products, and also in the Codex General Principles also there's a description, but more specific description you can find it in the Codex Code of Practice for Fish and Fishery Products. So there are 7 principles. The first principle is to conduct a hazard analysis, and then second is to determine the critical control points, establish critical limits for these control points at these points, and then establish monitoring procedures, establish corrective actions and verification procedures, and establish record keeping and documentation procedures. So the first step in a HACCP implementation is design and implementation of effective HACCP system. So you need to have a team. You have to assemble a HACCP team, describe the food and its distribution. You need to understand what are the intended use, who are the consumers, those who are going to consume. Is it going to a susceptible population? Develop a flow diagram which describes the process and verify the flow diagram. So the HACCP team should have expertise. So there should be trained people who can look at these different types of hazards that can come at different points in the processing. Could be starting from procurement of raw material to various steps in the processing, various ingredients, and how things are handled in a factory. So the team should be multidisciplinary and its size proportionate to the size of the business. So Codex also is trying to see HACCP can be applied not only by big businesses, but also by small business. Now, there are examples, there are publications from FAO which illustrate how the HACCP principles can be applied even in small businesses. So it's possible to apply, so people need not be worried that, okay, HACCP requires a lot of expertise, a lot of people, so it's not for small businesses. Small businesses can also apply HACCP principles. So in a processing factory which is intending to export, you need team members who have skills and expertise in a wide variety of technical disciplines relative to the products covered. Expertise is not essentially to all the members. So you may have certain lead members who have the expertise and others may be supporting them. And records must be maintained to demonstrate that HACCP team has the required knowledge and experience to develop the food safety system. So one person is designated HACCP team leader, and then the team works with the cooperation of all members. And for example, this is an example of a HACCP team job description. So what should be the background of the team leader, and what should be the responsibility and what are the duties of a team leader. So these kind of examples actually you can find in one of the FAO books which Rohana showed, the Assessment and Management of Seafood Safety and Quality, which came out in 2014. You have a lot of examples of how HACCP can be applied in a seafood processing establishment. So the next step is describing food and its distribution. So the HACCP team should look at the food and what is the composition, what are the chances of microbial growth, what are the chances of contamination, and how the product is distributed, who are the consumers. So all these aspects of the food and its distribution need to be considered by the HACCP team. Now for some examples again of product description. So this is in the case of a canned tuna in salt water. So what is the objective of the identification, and examples are given here. So what is the source of raw material and product characteristics, ingredients. And here you have a continuation of this. So what is the type of packaging that is used and how the end product is to be consumed, what is the shelf life, where the product will be sold, and what are the labeling instructions. So these need to be laid down because this gives an idea of how the product will be handled by a consumer and consumed. So that will affect the safety of the product. So intended use, so what is the intended use? Is it for a retail, or is it for food service, or is it for further processing? Will there be a kill step involved before the consumer consumes the product? So what is the potential for mishandling? What handling and preparatory procedures are required for end users, who are the end users of the product? So all these aspects need to be considered. And a flow diagram for the factory has to be made, starting from reception, and what are the different steps. So once the flow diagram for a factory is made, so the HACCP principles are general, but for each establishment there has to be separate HACCP plan because the flow diagram is different, the product is different. So you can't have a generic HACCP plan for everything, but you can have only the principles and you can apply it in different factories. So once the flow diagram is made, it has to be verified. You have to actually visit the factory and see whether the flow diagram that has been made matches with what is existing there. So what is the ground situation that then needs to be verified. And then you need to conduct the hazard analysis, which is the first step. So where can the hazards come from? Can it come from water? Can it come from raw material? So these aspects need to be considered. So are these microbiological hazards, or are these chemical hazards, heavy metals, or residues of veterinary drugs? So you need to consider what can come from the raw material or from the water or from the ingredients and other sources. So the hazard analysis involves this step of conducting this analysis. And then you need to also think of determination of acceptable level. So you may have heavy metals, for example. It will not be zero, but then you need to know what is the acceptable level. Similarly, for certain residues of veterinary drugs may be acceptable, some may not be acceptable. So you need to see what is acceptable. It may be related to the regulation in the target market. And then hazard evaluation. So what is the likelihood of occurrence of this hazard, and what is the severity of the effect? So that will help you to evaluate whether this will pose a significant risk to the consumer. So some examples of hazard analysis are also given in this FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture technical paper. So these are some examples: parasites, pathogenic bacteria, chemicals, and foreign matter, and so on. And yeah, it could be at the post-harvest and further processing levels, what can be the hazards. So these examples are also, you can find in this book. So in the case of tuna, what are the potential examples like botulinum and so on. And then determination of the acceptable level. So how do you determine? Now in the case of microorganisms, it may be mostly related to regulatory requirement. So what is mentioned in Codex, and maybe sometimes there may be some differences between Codex and other agencies, some regulatory requirements, particularly with respect to additives and some residues of veterinary drugs. You find some differences. For example, if you look at Codex, you will not have MRLs for all residues. But when it comes to certain country requirements, there may be certain country requirements. This is because the WTO SPS agreement provides for countries to have measures in areas where there is no international standard. So if there is no Codex requirement, then countries based on their own risk analysis can come out with the requirements. And then you need to also think of customer requirements, intended use by the customer, and other relevant data. For those products that will be exported to other countries, it is vitally important that HACCP team be cognizant of the regulatory and customer requirements in the destination country. So the HACCP team then evaluates the risk and then decides what is the severity, what is the likelihood of occurrence of this risk. And likelihood of occurrence, so you need to think of various situations like what is the effectiveness of the prerequisite program. So are there problems in implementing prerequisite program? Do you need to take corrective action even before thinking of applying HACCP? Or frequency of association of potential hazard with food ingredient, and what are the likely steps before consumption? So these aspects need to be considered. And then control measures could be any action or activity that could be used to prevent or eliminate food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Various examples are treatments like pasteurization, cooking, thermal processing, freezing, drying, and so on. But now for control measures for chemical hazards could include, now for microorganisms, yes, pasteurization, cooking may be okay, but you cannot reduce chemical hazards like heavy metals, residues of veterinary drugs by these treatments. So you may need to apply this measure at the raw material level. So how do you control the raw material before it comes to an establishment? Or what are the measures at farm level that are to be taken? So these aspects need to be considered for chemical hazards, because the processing will not be able to change the level of this hazard. And then what are the critical control points? A point or step at which control can be applied and is essential to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. And then you can use a decision tree. So because in Codex, there is an example of this decision tree. Does a control measure exist? Does it reduce the hazard to the acceptable level? Or is there any subsequent step? So you can use this type of decision tree to decide whether a point in a processing is a critical control point. And then what are the control measures? So it is specific to the hazard. So you need to identify what are the hazards and then decide a control measure that is specific to this, that is able to control at the critical control point in the process. And then once you have identified the hazard and the critical control point, you need to also establish critical limits. Now, for example, you say you are going to use pasteurization. So what should be the temperature? What should be the time? Or cooking. So what should be the time temperature? Or you are using, say, salt concentration for control of microorganisms. Then what should be the water activity, salt concentration, depending on the intrinsic factors like pH. And then if it is water treatment, it could be what is the level of chlorine that is to be used. So you need to establish critical limits for your control measures. So for a critical limit to be effective, it should be in place and operational, and it should be measurable and observable. So these are defined based on their ability to control, either prevent, eliminate, or reduce the hazard to a acceptable level. So these are you can find these type of examples in the FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture technical paper for biological hazards, physical hazards, and chemical hazards. So you can go through these details from this technical paper. And then if there is a deviation, this in HACCP, a deviation refers to failure to meet a critical limit. And then then what do you need to do to correct this situation? If there is a deviation, what are the steps that are required, need to be considered? So you need to monitor the implementation of HACCP, which is the act of conducting a planned sequence of observation. So you need to, again, decide where you need to conduct the observation, who is going to conduct the observation, at what frequency. So these kind of things need to be laid down in the HACCP plan. So tracking the operation of the process to enable identification of trends or loss of process control. And then establish a corrective action. So monitoring may indicate some deviation or failure. Then what is the corrective action that is to be taken? So you need to determine the corrective measures in case of non-compliance. So, or it could be a recall of a product if the product cannot be further processed. So you need to decide what should be the corrective action to be taken. So this is where you are establishing a corrective action. So what is to be done when a deviation occurs? Who is responsible for taking this? Is it done at factory level or based on the report from the laboratory? Or so you need to decide within the system how and who is to implement these measures and what records are to be developed and maintained of these actions taken. And then identifying the affected product and defending its disposition. So it could be either withdrawal or further cooking. So there can be a number of actions depending upon the hazard or the failure that has been detected. And then establish verification procedures. So Codex, there is a definition which means application of methods, procedures, tests, and other evaluations, in addition to monitoring to determine the compliance with HACCP. So verification is different from monitoring. So this is the difference, and validation is defined in Codex guideline as obtaining evidence that the elements of HACCP plan are effective. So you need to have this process of verification. So HACCP plan verification could involve verification of prerequisite program, verification of the critical control points, or verification of the HACCP plan. So you will find a lot of examples in this FAO Fishes technical paper. Then establish record keeping, because everything has to be recorded. Then only you'll be able to monitor and verify. Many times it may not be laboratory verification, but record checking. So record keeping is an important aspect of HACCP. So the HACCP team should be multidisciplinary and have a complete understanding of the firm's products and processes, as well as likely hazards in these products. And HACCP systems are dynamic, and HACCP plans need to be revalidated annually. So if there is a slight change in the process, or change in your raw material procurement, or change in the water supply, you may have to again check your plan and see, revalidate this your HACCP plan. So now, of course, in the first slide I mentioned about Food Safety Day, and so the theme of this year's Food Safety Day is that everybody is responsible. So it's a shared responsibility. So this illustrates how food safety management in the seafood chain requires participation from every player, from farm to fork. So at aquaculture, if you have to produce safe products, you need to have good aquaculture practices, which probably can be verified by using schemes like aquaculture certification schemes. So for minimizing risk due to residues of veterinary drugs, for example, you need to apply these good aquaculture practices. And then at production level, you need to have HACCP. And after processing also, you need to have good hygienic practice during transport, storage, retail, catering. So everywhere good hygienic practice till it is consumed is very important, and you need to have traceability all along to see that these are effectively implemented, so that you can identify wherever the failure has happened. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karan. It was indeed a very wholesome view about the process of HACCP, and very well clearly explained. We are just going to sort of take a break before we move to the next presentation, because we have Dr. Rohana will have to adjourn shortly for another appointment. So we're going to open the floor for questions for Dr. Rohana. If there are any questions, you may ask those questions right now, or if you could place them on the Q&A tab. I think we have one question from Sujit. Sujit, you have a question for Dr. Rohana? We can't hear you, Sujit. We can't hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Rohana, thank you very much for your comprehensive presentation as usual, and we learned a lot from your presentation always. So just it's a not question, it's actually for my knowing. We know due to the increasing production, aquaculture production, we are observing that the farmers are using more aquatic animal health and nutritional products in their farms. So how or what suggestion you can give to our InfoFish member countries to minimize the negative impact of application of these aquatic animal health products? Thank you.
Thank you, Sujit. I guess you're talking about using antibiotics.
Yeah.
Right, directly. So yes, this has been an issue and this will be an issue for the next 2 decades, I would say, right? I don't think we will. The issue is that there's a new group globally discussing at the UN level. There's a new group called Antimicrobial Resistance Advisory Committee to the United Nations. I happen to be a member of that committee. And the issue of antimicrobial resistance coming from haphazardous use of antibacterials and antibiotics in food production has been an issue. We debated for many years, aquaculture is not a very big a victim of that, but then the information suggests that there is some contribution of aquaculture also to antimicrobial resistance development in globally. So the whole idea is antibacterials, in my opinion, antibacterials are there to use, not to keep them in a locked cupboard. If that is the case, then you don't need to make them. So they are used, but properly used, what we call a prudent use of antibiotics. How do you use them prudently? Number one, you use an antibiotic for human. You do a test. First, see what the disease, what the pathogen, what bacteria, and then you have a specific prescription for that particular bacteria after probably sensitivity test. So you are targeting something very specifically using a bacteria, but mostly what happens with the small scale sector of aquaculture, where there is no good disease diagnostics before treatment, you basically use antibacterials, antibiotics as a means to protect your stock from dying. Unfortunately, this is the case. Over the last 10-15 years, we have seen a significant reduction in the use of some antibiotics in aquaculture in many countries. There are banned antibacterials to use in food production, even in aquaculture. There are nitrofurans, chloramphenicol. There are some of these are completely banned.
Yes.
Means that Karun will say that if you find them in a parts per billion level, your products will be rejected at the borders. So we have learned a lot of things that we can do to reduce antibacterial use. We have learned a lot of methods and procedures to reduce the use and still keep our animals healthy. So good aquaculture practices, better management practices, trying to keep the bugs out of the systems and to reduce introduction of diseases. All these things will help you to reduce the use of antibiotics. I think my advice and my message to anyone who is practicing aquaculture is that you just, if you want, don't say that you don't want to use antibiotics. If you don't use antibiotics, that's great. Sort of there are, sort of the organic products, you not using any therapeutics, they are great. But there are places where you might have to use. If that is the case, only use it with the advice from a veterinarian after proper diagnostic of the reason and the disease that is occurring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Sujit. And thank you, Dr. Rana. We have one question from among the participants. Dr. Rana, supermarkets, retailers, and end consumers are increasingly demanding products which are not only sanitary, but also those that meet environmental and human rights criteria. This may result in the exclusion of some small-scale farmers who are unable to meet the cost of compliance. What are some of the suggestions which could be implemented in developing countries to empower the small-scale sector?
Thank you, Charlene. Very pertinent question. Very pertinent question, not only to aquaculture, but for many food commodity producing sectors. The cost of production is increasing. Some of the food prices are not necessarily increasing. So therefore, there is always sectors are trying to reduce the cost of production by what we call amalgamating, or rather, aggregating. So that the big corporate sector is always thriving, kicking most of the smallholders out of business. That is happening because of the cost. And your question talking about the environmental obligations and making sure that the products are environmentally sound and environmentally friendly produce, it has been the case for the past 10 years or even more and more demand from the consumers to ensure that whatever they consume have not caused negative social and economic consequences to the society. Only way to address that issue among the smallholders who are very small in production, very small in size, very little support they have, very probably little knowledge they have of what they are doing. Only way that they can progressively improve themselves and to find better markets is to what we call cluster them or group them. One single smallholder with a half a hectare farm producing 1 ton of fish probably doesn't have a big bargaining power. But if you put 100 of them, which will have 500 hectares of farming, which 100 tons of fish, has a bargaining power. That bargaining power, together they can come up with what we call good aquaculture practices, get that group into a certification program where that someone, a third party, will certify that the products coming out of this cluster is certified for environmental friendliness and whatever the other criteria, and it will have, you will be able to access international or trade a bit better than it used to be. So my advice is that smallholders, for you to be able to comply to some of these societal requirements and to be able to access international markets, is that you need to group them together in a manageable clusters level and run them with certain codes of practice or management practices. Thank you.
Okay, we have one question on. After, I think we have 2 people who would like to ask questions over live.
Yeah, I already allowed that to speak.
Okay, may I invite Jirapon to ask your question first?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Dr. Rohana, in your talk, you mentioned about 2 generations for quarantine, something like that, but I don't really sure that I can understand all of that. Can you repeat that for me again, please?
Thank you, Jirapon. Yes, I mentioned this for new introductions. If you are moving an animal, a fish or aquatic animal from one place to a place where this animal has never been. Let's say that you are moving a species to a new country or a new geographical boundary where that animal has never been. This is what we call an introduction. For an introduction, there are what we call pre-border, border, and post-border requirements for importation or transfer. They are outlined very clearly in the ICES guidelines. The ICES guidelines says that if you are moving an animal to a new country, a new introduction, you should not use that animal directly into whatever you want to do, but you should keep that generation. You only use the third generation for aquaculture. If it is for aquaculture, for example, if you move a tilapia from one country to a country where there is no tilapia, you have to keep them 2 generations in quarantine, and you only use the third generation for culture. Before you move, you have to do a full risk assessment, genetics, health, and environmental risk assessment to ensure that the movement has either, we cannot say no risk, a manageable risk only, that you can, with any mitigative measures that you use to manage the risk, you can move the animal, but you keep the animal for 2 generations and you only use the 3rd generation for the culture purposes. Understood?
Yes, thank you. But by the way, if we are talking about the movement of ornamental fish, so it will be in a different situation, right? Because we want to use it right away. We want to to use it for decoration. So what should we do in this case?
Jerapon, what we call, you hit the nail on the head. That's what we call. These do not consider as food animals.
No.
Unfortunately, ornamental fish trade is not necessarily regulated by none of these standards and guidelines. It's a very unfortunate situation. We had paid a lot, and particularly things like koi herpes virus disease in many countries, mainly because of the koi carps being moved around. And unfortunately, some of these are not necessarily very much governed by some of the international treaties. So yes, you are right. You move an animal, but again, remember what I said is not just a movement. I was talking about an introduction. Introductions are different from movements. Not all movements are introductions. The movements could be transfers, translocations, reintroductions, or anything. But the 3 generation breeding is only for new introductions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jerapon. Thank you, Dr. Rana. And Mr. Sirajul Islam has a question also for you, Dr. Rana.
Hello, can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for arranging this beautiful webinar. Aquatic Animal Health Management System, the trade obligations. My question is to Mr.
Dr. Rohana.
Dr. Rohana, please. Yes. Can you? Is there any possibility for transferring any disease or like this virus, bacteria, parasite from frozen or processed food traded from one country to another country? Is there any scope for quarantine or any process, any precautionary measures for this?
I think there's been a debate on, depends on what pathogen you're talking about. These are specific cases of a specific pathogen, specific cases. I think we are talking about a frozen product. If you and whether, so I remember years back we were discussing about white spot disease virus, whether the virus can be moved through frozen shrimp, and one group says yes, the other group says no. Then there's also some debate about some of the bacteria. Shall I ask Karun to answer that question? Please, Karun, if you're around.
Yes. Dr. Karun.
Karun?
After, can you unmute him, please?
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Karun, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't get the question.
The question, Karun, is that can pathogens be transferred through frozen food, frozen products?
What pathogens?
It didn't say the question is like that. That's not about.
No.
It's just a general question.
Okay. Yeah, of course, freezing does not kill pathogens. So freezing does not eliminate pathogens. So pathogens can still be transmitted through frozen food. So freezing we cannot consider as a means of eliminating pathogens. So we need to consider what other means we need to use in the case of a frozen product to minimize the risk due to these pathogens.
For an example, any bacteria, like let's say, are there any guidelines on frozen product trade and pathogen transfer?
No, you mean from food safety point of view, isn't it?
From aquatic animal health point of view.
Aquatic animal, yes.
Oh, okay. No, from aquatic animal health point of view, I am not aware of any example of transfer through frozen product. For example, white spot disease has been there in Asia for say since the early 90s. But frozen shrimp has been traded for such a long period of time. And we don't have any example of white spot disease, which has been transferred from one country to another through frozen shrimp intended for human consumption. But it's only through, say, use of some of these shrimp as bait in some instances, this has happened. I think it happened in Australia where they used frozen shrimp, which was actually not intended to be used for bait. They had used for bait. So otherwise, product intended for human consumption have not been the vehicle for transmission of aquatic animal pathogens into aquaculture. If they are used as per the intended use. So it is intended use is the human consumption.
Okay, so I think you are saying like that for quarantine view, the frozen product need not to be quarantined as to protect the pathogens to introduction to other countries.
Yeah, in the case of frozen products, there is no question of quarantine because it's already processed. Yeah. So keeping it before consumption will not help. So quarantine applies only for live animals.
Yeah, yes.
Exactly. Okay. We do not quarantine products, we quarantine animals, live animals.
Yes, thank you for clarification.
Okay, we have one more question from, was that Mr. Muhammad Homion? Do we have one more question from Mr. Khan? No. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Charlene. Thanks, Dr. Ruhana, for nice presentation and nice question and answer deliberation. One a follow-up question regarding your answer about quarantine of frozen products. What about the chilled products? Whether chilled products should be quarantined or not? Thank you.
Thank you. The simple answer is that we never use the word quarantine for non-live things. You know, you quarantine live things, right? Because you're keeping that live. You maintain it in a confined environment to see whether we quarantine people. You know, right now COVID-19, you're quarantined 2 weeks. You know, sort of at home. So it's all live. We do not quarantine products. And chilled products also, the question is whether the chilled products has any pathogens, but it's already dead. And if this animal, exactly what Karun mentioned about the bait fish, if you use this in a wild environment, if there is any pathogen, there is a possibility of moving that pathogen into wild. But if you are using it for consumption, as long as those pathogens are not human pathogens, then of course there's no issue with the moving of the directly causing aquatic animal health disease, what we call transboundary diseases. But the possibility of an animal pathogen moving with a dead product, chilled, is possible. I think depends on what you're talking about, what pathogen. But again, how do you handle it? Whether the risk of is anything in that animal which can go out into a production facility or the wild is always all based on what you do with it. But we do not quarantine dead products or dead animals or products, frozen products in aquaculture. No.
Thank you for your clarification.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Humayun. Thank you, everyone, for those who have submitted your questions. Dr. Rohana, I believe you will have to adjust for your next webinar.
Yeah, I think I need to move in about a few minutes. So thank you so much. I'm happy that everything is going well. Thanks to everyone. And if anything, just get in touch with me. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Rohana, for your time, and all the best to you.
Bye for now.
Bye. Okay, so we will now move on to our next and final presentation, which will be by Mr. Sujit Das from InfoFish. And Sujit will be discussing on the national strategies for aquatic animal health management, some of the key considerations. Sujit, over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Sujit, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you and welcome to my presentation. I will now focus on the national strategies for aquatic animal health and key considerations. Okay. So if you consider about the aquatic animal health industry, we have to consider about the broodstock, broodstock and hatchery, that is the seed, and the nursing of the PL. So in total, it is the total hatchery and nursing management, including the broodstock. Next, we have to consider about the farm, and farming is now being has been going up to from land to the sea farming, and we have to consider about the feed industry, and it may be raw or finished, and aquatic animal health management products. We are discussing about the animal health management products, though we know it has a very good market throughout the world, that it contributing a lot, but it has some positive impacts, but negative impacts. So, but we cannot, we are also including it in our animal health industry. and also the live processed aquatic products and allied industry. So from farm to the processing plants, we all the activities we are considering happening in this aquaculture industry, we can consider it as an aquatic animal health industry. Yes, we see big picture, and we are also seeing that very different fishes, shrimps, mollusks. So we know that the intensification in aquaculture practice and rapidly expanding the global trade, and these practices provide platform for the spread of transboundary diseases, and this is due to the movement of live aquatic animals, and it is happening only for the live aquatic animals. And in case of frozen and processed product, the risk we can say that is not more. And but for the live movement of live aquatic animals, the chance of spreading the transboundary pathogens or diseases is more. So here we are giving some information by which from the Globefish highlights January 22, we are seeing that the global production is increasing, and which is also emphasizing the global trade. So from which we can consider that as the production is increasing, so the global trade also increasing. But at the same time, as the total live aquatic animal movement is increasing, so the intensification in the production is acting as a platform for the transfer of transboundary diseases. So what are the importance of national strategies of aquatic animal health? Yes, we have some specific importance for national strategies for aquatic animal health, and we can also share here that in the next few years, every program or projects considered to the aquaculture, relevant to aquaculture, cannot be considered if the countries has no strategies for national strategies for aquatic animal health, because we can consider it as a baseline for the aquaculture management. So what are the basically it improves the biosecurity level at regional and farm level, and it strengthens the emergency disease preparedness and response capacity. It also enhances the aquatic animal surveillance and diagnostic services, and national strategy also improves the availability and the prudent application of veterinary medicines, and it advances the research, training, awareness among the stakeholders. So we can say that it has a very good importance on the aquaculture sector. So what are the key considerations, or what are the key discussion points today? We will consider the key considerations in national strategies of aquatic animal health are the competent authority, legislative support, enhanced disease diagnostic capabilities, national and building or making the national database on aquatic animal health management, and disease surveillance, monitoring and reporting, and farm biosecurity, emergency preparedness and contingency planning and zoning, quarantine and health certification, risk analysis, networking, and cooperation. So these are the key considerations, and I will focus on these key considerations. I will discuss on these key considerations. So what are the responsibilities of the competent authority? If we consider about the competent authority, is an agency, and is an agency or authority for the implementation or the supervision of the measures recommended by the OIE Aquatic Animal Health Code. And competent authority also enhances the technical and diagnostic capability of a country, and these agency coordinate and communicate. They coordinate with the relevant agencies related to the aquaculture department, and communicate and cooperate with the regional and international organizations who are working with the aquatic animal health. And this competent authority also works as a regulatory body, and it approves the health certificate and registers the aquatic animal health products and their manufacturers, traders, and aquaculture premises and third-party service providers like laboratory and quarantine facilities. So it also carry out the enforcement activities as a regulatory body for non-compliance to national practice or legislation and international trade. And it also establishes and regularly update on National Aquatic Animal Health Database. Yes, it is very important to conduct all the activities on time. National Aquatic Animal Health Database is very much important, and it is also one of the responsibility of competent authority to maintain the National Aquatic Animal Health Database and carry out the disease monitoring, inspection, and surveillance. It also creates awareness among the stakeholders through extension and awareness program. So what are the framework of competent authority? Actually, the key activities are being performed by several departments under the ministry and the respective departments. So we can consider what are the key activities done by the competent authorities. As I mentioned earlier, issuance of health certificates for the live aquatic animals and aquatic animal health product registration, import and export. And it also perform contingency planning and zoning, and it also maintain the aquatic animal health database, networking and communication, and disease diagnosis and surveillance and monitoring, R&D and training, quarantine, risk analysis. So all these activities perform maintained by the competent authority, but these activities can be done by the separate department, like the quarantine. For quarantine, fisheries department have some separate department for fish quarantine and inspection, like fish quarantine and inspection. And for risk analysis, they can use the fish quality control department. And for research and development and the diagnostic, they can use the national reference laboratory, like the Aquatic Animal Health Disease Diagnostic Laboratory. And for research and development, they can use their separate research and development center. So the legislative support. Yes, legislative support is the legal document that authorizes competent authority while implementation of National Aquatic Animal Health Strategy. So the laws related to the aquatic animal health should cover aquatic animal movement, import, export, quarantine, and health certification, procedures, and destruction of disease stock, compensation, etc. And this competent authority will also take into consideration of the following international and regional guidelines, but not limited to, while they're framing out any aquatic animal health legislation nationally. Suppose they should consider about the OIE, International Aquatic Animal Health Code, and they should consider about the WTO sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, and obviously they have to consider the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. And this competent authority should have the capacity and expertise to develop national policy and support while implementation of key elements in national strategy for aquatic animal health. So the next step is the enhanced disease diagnostic capability. Yes, it is one of the major part of national strategy for aquatic animal health. And disease diagnostic service to the farmers and disease surveillance can be done by establishing the national disease national disease diagnostic reference laboratories, and it can coordinate with the regional laboratories, and they can also establish some field laboratories which can coordinate with the regional laboratories and then national disease reference laboratories. So short-term and long-term training and professional development is also essential to develop aquatic animal health professionals and experts or the technicians. So in this way, we can develop the national disease diagnostic capability. So how national database on aquatic national database can be done can be done on aquatic animal health? Yes, I'd like to mention some specific recommendation here. Some specific recommendation for compiling while compiling national database, the country or the state should consider the national list of aquatic animal diseases, considering the YE and the regional report that is regularly produced by NACA. So these national disease lists should consider these two key report for listing out the aquatic animal disease for any country. And the national list for registered aquatic animal health professionals and aquaculturists, experts, technicians engaged in aquatic animal. Yes, I also think that these professionals or the experts, all who are working in the animal health sector, that should be compiled in it. If it is in a database, then they can communicate each other, they can cooperate each other. So national list of diagnostic laboratories, including national reference laboratories, regional and satellite laboratories. We know in this format, our InfoFish member country, Thailand, is also working well in this way. They have the diagnostic laboratory in the national level, regional level, and in local level. So another option, another point is that the national list of banned antibiotics should be kept in the national database, so that the experts, the national aquatic animal health experts, can see what products are being approved and what the antibiotics are being banned for aquaculture. And one thing I also mentioned here, that in some approved aquatic animal health products, we see that the dosage has not been stated properly. So we don't confuse, we don't have to confuse with the dose and dosage. So dosage is something which can mention with the how many, what is the frequency, how many, it also mentions what is the duration of the product. So dosage means is a broader things, but dose is for single use. So if we can make a list of the national aquatic animal health products, including the dosage of the products, it will be good. And national list of traders and manufacturers of related to the aquatic animal health products. Yes, if it is in national database, so that the competent authority can control, can cooperate, yeah, everything. So the next step is the disease surveillance, monitoring, and reporting. Yes, disease surveillance is an integral part of national aquatic animal health strategy, and it may be of two types: active surveillance and passive surveillance. So active surveillance is the disease data collection of a specific disease, and passive surveillance is the existing the collection, analysis, and dissemination of an existing disease. So and information generated from the surveillance system must be preserved in the national database, where competent authority can utilize this data for national, regional, and international interest. And for disease surveillance, we have to consider the OIE listed 24 OIE listed disease to demonstrate disease-free country status. And farmers should also notify competent authority or the authorized fish inspectors and authorized veterinarians when the listed or the suspected disease occurs and abnormal or unknown mortality occurs. It may be in his farm or in his neighboring farm, and they should inform within the shortest period of time. It may be 3 to 7 days. So the next pillar is farm biosecurity. Yes, farmers should notify competent authority, as I mentioned earlier, when the diseases of concern or the suspicion or the unexplained mass mortality occurs. And disease-free aquatic animals should be introduced in the farm to prevent introduction of disease to the farm. And newly introduced aquatic animals should be contained for a period of time, and it should be maintained strictly for the imported products, imported live aquatic animals. And farmers should also ensure the GAP, the good aquaculture practice, in every stages of production to ensure the farm biosecurity. So we will discuss about the emergency preparedness, contingency planning, and zoning. So the disease emergency required when certain aquatic animals undergo severe mortality and urgent action needed. So these emergency infectious disease emergency can be happen in various ways, like when the introduction of known exotic species happen, or it may be happened of sudden change in existing endemic disease, or it may be happen in the case of appearance of previously unrecognized disease. So the disease emergency for the infectious disease, it can be happen in various ways. But the most important thing is that we should have a contingency plan so that we can combat with this emergency. But yes, so the contingency plan, what it is this is a set of operational procedures that would be used for the containment or the eradication of serious aquatic animal diseases. And it can be done in various ways. It will be clear in the next flowchart. Before doing that, I'll just focus on how we detect the early detection, early notification, and the early control, how it can be done. I will just focus on a few lines on that. Early detection is possible when the stakeholders reports timely for immediate investigation, and early warning can be done by accessing the report in a regional or international system. But we usually, it can be done by the OIE, Organization of International Epizootics report, or the NACA Quad report, Quad disease report. It is regional report, and OIE report is international report. So we can, if we go through this report regularly, then we can have some early warning what is going on in our region or in international level. And early response, how it can be done, it is done to contain the farm area and to ensure not to release the worst water without disinfection and proper disposal of dead animals. So these contingency planning are being used by one of our InfoFish member country, and I take this from FAO workshop report, which is being presented by the DUF representative, in a workshop happened in 2017 in China. So how the contingency is done in the DOF Thailand? They're doing it when the farms, when the disease outbreak is happening in farm level or in wild areas. They communicate with the local, regional and local laboratories. If they are not sufficient to mitigate the problem, then the regional officers communicate with the national disease diagnostic laboratories. And in case of finding notifiable disease, they start the contingency plan to combat the aquatic animal disease. The flowchart will continue. So the contingency plan to combat the aquatic disease, and here DOF Thailand is engaging the local provincial fisheries officers as the director for emergency aquatic animal disease control centers. And these fisheries provincial officers communicate with the National Aquatic Disease Reference Laboratory by sending the authorized veterinary officers or the fish inspectors to investigate the farm site, the outbreak site. And if the disease outbreak occurs in a single farm or as a small closed area, they engage the authorized veterinary officer or fish inspectors to make an order to the farmer for quarantining the suspected aquatic animal. And when the disease spreads in a certain area, but not wide, so they ask the authorized veterinary officers declare it as a temporary disease affected area. When the disease affected area is a wide area, then the local veterinary officers reports to the regional provincial governor to announce the area as a disease affected zone or the doubted disease infected zone. So from here we see that the outbreak area can be defined as two temporary disease affected zone or disease affected zone. So for the temporary disease, they follow the public awareness and they go for epidemiological investigation. And for disease affected zone, they authorize the veterinary officer for the movement control. Movement control is done strictly because for import or export, they should trace out the aquatic animal from which farm is coming out or coming in. And they should, they also follow quarantine, treatment, cure and destroy by the veterinary officers. And sometimes they communicate with the national level officers. So, and they also follow monitoring or the target surveillance, and it is done by the veterinary officers or the national officers. And when the outbreak is over, the fisheries, the regional or the provincial fisheries officers contact the authorized veterinary officer to request the provincial governor for withdraw the temporary or disease affected zone or the doubted disease infected zone. So in this way, this is the example of one of our InfoFish member country, how they are managing the contingency plan and how they are zoning. So I think this is a fantastic example of contingency planning and implementation. And I think other InfoFish member countries also can follow this. And the next step is for national strategies of aquatic animal health is quarantine and health certification. Yes. Why quarantine is required? Quarantine, we can define quarantine as a group of aquatic live aquatic animals in isolation with direct contact with other no direct contact with the other aquatic animals. So this process actually includes various steps like pre-border, border, and post-border activities, including the pre-movement certification, movement, confinement on arrival, checking during confinement, releases and subsequent monitoring as appropriate. And wastewater of quarantine facilities must be treated with the appropriate chemical disinfectant before disposal. And aquatic animal carcasses and their disposal must be destroyed, either sanitary landfill or incineration, or by using the disinfectants. Yes, so the procedures of health certification and why health certification is important. It is important to protect the native fauna from the deleterious impact of the exotic species or diseases. And it is for importer, it is mandatory for the importer to declare it is free from YE listed disease. So health certification is required by the importer because some exporter countries also ask for this health certification. So without the health certification, live aquatic animal cannot be exported. So these flowchart we also take it from DUF Thailand, and these health certification procedures we see that registered aquaculture establishments are inspected and the samples are collected for the specific disease. All results are inputted to the database. When these the results comply with the standards, then they can only apply for the certificates. So the results, if the results do not comply with the standards, they ask for the corrective actions. And when they meet the standards, they can again apply for the certification. And the correction cannot meet the standard actions. So the aquaculture establishment is suspended or withdrawn from the register if the registered aquaculture establishment cannot comply with the correction, cannot meet the standard correction measures. Yes, I will now focus on the procedures of aquatic animal health registration. And this is actually, I proposed this aquatic animal health product registration process, and I made it into two parts, one for the imported products, and in the left side for the imported products, and right side for the domestic manufactured products. So how how it can be active, we see that the aquatic animal health products trader or manufacturers apply for the registration in the competent authority, and competent authority registered the traders or manufacturers. In case of imported products, they go for the physical inspection, and if the physical inspection is satisfactory, and they can go for the conditional NOC. But if not satisfactory, they can again they can go for the quality and efficacy test. And when the quality and efficacy test is not satisfactory, they will be suggested for the for the new application. So what actually this is three-stage registration process. It for the and it is only for the left side is for the imported products, and for new products or for the manufactured products, what we are suggesting for new product registration, they should apply to the competent authority with all the documents, including the certificate of analysis and certificate of origin, method of analysis, stability data, material safety data sheet, including every relevant documents. If the the documents are found satisfactory, then they go for the screening, and after that they go for evaluation. And if the regulatory outcome goes positive, then they approve they can approve the product for registration. If not, then it can be rejected, and they can the manufacturer can appeal for re-registration. So this is actually is a proposed registration process, and I think as our in the InfoFish member countries, we have a lot of aquaculture activities, and the trades are also increasing, and they can follow this flowchart for product registration. And the next pillar is risk analysis. So risk analysis is the process by which hazards or the pathogens associated with the introduction of a particular animal are identified, and the paths and likelihoods of the introduction and the establishment are described. The consequences are defined, and the management options are also addressed. And a typical risk assessment process, risk analysis process, may include the hazard identification, risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. And the results of the risk analysis can be useful during the import permission and the risk management. Yes, this one is the another important tool for national strategy for aquatic animal health. An active linkage with the farmers, that is all the stakeholders, including farmers, trade associations, experts from the universities and the diagnostic laboratories and the government agencies is crucial. And regional and international cooperation with the organizations dealing with the aquatic animal health products, aquatic animal health programs, and the trade regulatory bodies can also be included in the networking. So what are the take-home messages? I hope and do believe that if any, I know all maximum countries, not maximum, all, most of the countries are following national strategies on aquatic animal health, but I do believe that they have some, they have to review of their strategies regardless to the legislation, regardless to the new product registration system. So I think if any of our InfoFish member states follow the national strategies for aquatic animal health, we do believe that there will be improved biosecurity and advanced facility for disease detection and prevention, surveillance and control, and enhanced opportunity for research, development and training, and they will have the access to prudent use of veterinary medicines in aquaculture, and they will ensure the resilient and sustainable aquatic food production system with the minimum antimicrobial resistance. And obviously, the last but not the least, they should confirm, or they should work on the welfare of the farmed fish. So I should acknowledge the DUF Thailand, because I used one of the report, their country report that has been published in the FAO workshop in China in the 2017, and I have also gone to some references which are being cited here. So thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Sujit, for that very enlightening presentation. So we now have about 20-25 minutes for some questions that we could ask to the two panelists, Dr. Karuna Sagar and Sujit. Will there be any questions? Those who would like to raise their hand for a live question, you may do so. Otherwise, you could have your questions typed onto the Q&A session, Q&A tab, sorry. After, can you unmute Dr. Karuna Sagar, please?
Okay, done, Suli.
Okay, thank you. So there's one question I would like to pose to Dr. Karun. Dr. Karun is there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Karun, you've explained very clearly on the HACCP guidelines earlier and on in relation to aquatic products. I think a lot of us are quite curious with this ongoing COVID pandemic. And could you let us know that to many of us, HACCP is already as good, a very good guidelines for us. But how do you think this COVID pandemic will affect? Do you think there will be any impact, or do you think it's necessary to further strengthen the HACCP guidelines, considering the current, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, of course, that's a very good question and very appropriate now. I think all the food industry is now thinking what they need to do. But if we look at the current guidelines, say for example, the hygiene guideline, it already mentions what we need to do. For example, a sick person should not come for processing, should not handle food. And then hygiene has to be followed. So basically, many aspects are covered. But in addition to this, probably one of the things that the food processing industry could follow, I think that is already followed in a factory, covering the face and the use of face mask. So that is important to ensure that any droplets, respiratory droplets are not deposited on any products, and also to save to safeguard the health of the processors. So I think by applying these general principles, the seafood processing industry can carry on. And one good thing so far is that there is no evidence to show that COVID is transmitted through food. So it's not a foodborne disease, but it can be deposited on surfaces. So if and this virus is susceptible to temperature, so say 70 degrees would inactivate the virus. So there is no problem for consumers in taking food, cooked seafood at all. And then from the industry perspective, of course, good hygienic practice and following hand hygiene and use of face mask, I think should ensure that there is no contamination that is taking place during handling food. So this is what FAO and WHO have also been saying. So there is a guideline from FAO and WHO what the food processing industry needs to do to minimize the risk to the consumers due to COVID. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Karan, do we have any other questions for Dr. Karan or Sujit? I think I don't see any.
Yeah.
Sujit?
Yeah, if you have time, just it's for not related to the today's topic also, but just for knowing. Yeah, you already mentioned that this virus COVID-19 is not related to the seafood products, and but actually, so the existing our good aquaculture practice or the biosecurity guidelines will cover, or we need to prepare any SOP for the future if in future any infectious disease outbreak occurs like SARS-CoV-2. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the present guidelines cover, because the good aquaculture practice involves managing water quality, water sanitation. So these things are already there. So they will take care of the pathogens that we are talking about. And as I mentioned, so far there is no evidence to show that COVID-19 can be transmitted either through water or through food. Of course, there have been instances where they have detected viral particles or viral RNA. I wouldn't say viral particles, viral RNA in sewage. but it's still not live virus. So probably it indicates that some virus excretion has been there in the community, but it's not a live virus. So there is no fear of transmission of COVID-19 through water or and through food. Of course, we need to take care of contamination while handling so that droplets are not deposited. So I think good aquaculture practice as of now takes care of pathogens like these. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Karun. So I guess we're just waiting if there are any other questions or anyone would like to ask a live question. I don't see anyone raising their hands. So I guess it was very well elaborated and presented, and I think we all agree that we are well informed more now. Got our clarifications on how this COVID, the impact of it on the technical side of seafood, and sort of answers our qualms about whether we should stop eating seafood or not. This has been in the minds of many consumers across the world. So I'm going to, I think we can end the session today. Thank you very much, Dr. Karun, for your time and for sharing with us your experience. And also Sujit, thank you very much. We also thank Dr. Rohana for earlier on sharing with us his experience and on the global international trade obligations. So looking forward to meeting everyone again, perhaps in our next upcoming webinars. Please do look out. Also for the information of participants, we will be sharing the link to the video of this webinar in the coming few days. We will be sending the link to you, and you may be able to view it again if you would like to refer to any specific part of the video or share it with your other colleagues in your divisions. So thank you once again, and have a good evening, a good day ahead, and goodbye. Thank you.